Imagine walking home on a warm Phoenix night in 2006. There's a low hum from air conditioners, a neighbor's TV floating through an open window, and the street lights make long yellow halos on the pavement. You hear a car before you see it. Headlights slide past, then a single crack, and the world gets very small. That crack was enough to change lives, to turn routine nights into a citywide panic. Welcome to Still Unanswered. I'm Mara Velasquez. Tonight, the case we called the Phoenix serial shooter. 2 men, a car, a string of drive-by shootings, and a city on edge. We'll walk through who they were, how they were caught, what the evidence shows about motive, and the questions that still sit heavy on the asphalt. With me is Dr. Leon Harper, criminologist and forensic psychologist. Leon, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mara. It's good to be here. This case is one of those that sticks with you, not because it's tidy, but because of how many loose ends it left. The human cost alone demands careful unpacking.
Right. Before we get into names and arrests, I want you to feel what the city felt. Phoenix in the mid-2000s was booming, sprawl, late-night life because the days were too hot. But between May 2005 and July 2006, people stopped feeling safe on sidewalks. Walks became calculations. Which streets had lights, which routes had traffic, how far until home. Leon, what's the sociological effect of that kind of ambient fear on a city?
It's corrosive. When a hazard is unpredictable, randomized, as these shootings were, people lose a sense of control. They alter routines, they isolate, they distrust strangers and even their own neighborhoods. That fear ripples into local economies, night businesses suffer, and it changes policing priorities, often diverting resources to high-pressure investigations that constrain community relations.
And Phoenix had 2 predators at once. Not just the serial shooter doing drive-bys, but the baseline killer, Mark Godot, committing abductions and sexual assaults near Baseline Road. The overlap made every new report a question. Which predator was responsible? Which one is this? That uncertainty fed panic.
Absolutely. 2 active serial patterns at the same time is rare and uniquely challenging. It creates noise calls, tips, composite sketches, and that noise can obscure signals investigators need. It also stretches police capacity. You need specialized units, ballistics teams, victim advocates. When resources are thin, pattern recognition gets delayed.
Let's name the 2 men who would be arrested. Dale Sean Hausner and Samuel John Dieteman. They were ordinary in many respects. Custodian, roommate, a photojournalist who covered local boxing matches. Yet allegedly responsible for dozens of shootings, a pair of arsons, animal killings, and multiple murders. Leon, when you first read about their public lives, airport custodian, hobby photographer, what does that tell you about assumptions we make about offenders?
It's a reminder not to romanticize the profile of a killer. The popular imagination sometimes expects monsters who stand out, social pariahs, loners, but violence like this can come from people embedded in communities. They can hold steady jobs, have hobbies, and maintain social surfaces that mask destructive behavior. In co-offending cases, dynamics within the pair can be especially important. One may be the leader, the other the follower, while both participate.
Let's dig into Dale Hausner first. Born in 1973, worked at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport since 1999, and had this side gig as a boxing photojournalist. He was arrested August 3, 2006, charged with a massive slate of crimes, somewhere around 87 to 88 counts, including 8 murders authorities believed he'd committed, dozens of shootings, arsons, and animal killings. Convicted in 2009 on 6 counts of first-degree murder, sentenced to death 6 times, and years later, died by suicide in 2013 while awaiting execution. The contradictions in his behavior, wanting notoriety but not fully confessing, really complicate the narrative.
Yes. On one hand, you have public statements that suggest he craved infamy, comparing himself to Charles Manson, and on the other, a resistance to a full, bare confession. That mix of grandiosity and ambivalence is common in offenders who want the story shaped on their terms. They seek a legacy, but often also want to control how they're perceived. Addiction and intoxication complicate motive analysis, but they don't fully explain intent.
Samuel Dieteman, 31 at arrest, had a track record of petty crimes, had moved back from Minnesota, and became Hausner's roommate. He pleaded guilty to 2 murders and a batch of other charges, took a life term without parole, and cooperated with investigators. He's often portrayed as the remorseful follower, someone who got swept into something far darker than his past offenses. Leon, how common is that leader-follower dynamic in co-offending serial pairs?
It's not the norm. Most serial murderers operate alone, but co-offending does happen. When it does, it often involves a dominant partner and a compliant partner, or 2 people who reinforce each other's worst impulses. Drug use, here methamphetamine, can erode inhibitions and make one partner more suggestible to the other's ideas. The important forensic question is always who pulled the trigger, who drove, who planned. Those divisions matter legally and morally, even if both are culpable.
Meth keeps coming up in the sources. Reports say many of the shootings happened while they were high, and the killings were at times treated like a sport, a cruel game. But as you've written, drugs don't absolve responsibility. They change the state of mind, yes, but
they're not a get-out-of-responsibility card. Meth creates dysregulated behavior, increased risk-taking, paranoia, flattened empathy. But the decision to arm oneself and shoot at strangers, that's still an active, highly consequential choice. Courts consider intoxication in sentencing sometimes, but it's rarely enough to mitigate the moral weight of premeditated acts.
Let's take the listener through how the spree unfolded. The general pattern: drive-by shootings from a car, usually at night. Victims included pedestrians, bicyclists, and animals. There were also arsons. Walmart stores burned within an hour of each other in June 2006, an escalation into killings of people like Robin Blasnick, a 22-year-old special needs woman who was walking to her boyfriend's house in Mesa and was gunned down late at night. That murder shook the city. Leon, for people on the ground, what does a high-profile homicide like Robin's do to public perception?
High-profile murders crystallize fear. Prior shootings might be dismissed as transient or isolated, but when you read a name, someone with a family, someone with plans, that brings the statistics down to a human level. It forces communities to confront that this is not abstract. Neighbors are at risk. Public pressure on the police intensifies, and media coverage ramps up, sometimes creating a feed loop of fear and demand for answers.
From the investigative side, the early challenges were intense. Attacks were fast, late at night, often no witnesses who could describe faces or plates. Investigators had to rely on ballistics to link scenes and on a pattern of a light-colored sedan. But they were also dealing with the baseline killer in parallel, which flooded the system with tips and stretched labor. I'd like to pause. Leon, did the task force approach the serial shooter and baseline killings as separate problems from the start, or was there confusion?
Initially, there was both a separate and overlapping approach. Ballistic specialists and pattern recognition units tried to separate the incidents by MO, modus operandi, drive-bys versus abductions and sexual violence. But in the public mind, they blurred. For investigators, triage was necessary. Which scenes connected by ballistics? Which victims fit a pattern? Resource allocation decisions, who gets more detectives, who gets the forensics priority, are always imperfect under high pressure.
The break in the case has this almost cinematic quality. An acquaintance of Dieteman came forward and told police Dieteman boasted about going out cruising and shooting people. That tip gave the police names, led to surveillance, to the identification of Hausner, and then to search warrants. In searches, they found guns and ammunition linked via ballistics to multiple scenes and evidence connecting them to the Walmart arsons. They announced arrests on August 4, 2006. For the community, that morning brought relief, but also bewilderment. 2 guys who'd been part of the city's fabric were accused of terrorizing it. Leon, how does the reality of arrests, 2 ordinary men, affect communal healing?
It's mixed. Arrests bring relief and closure for the immediate terror, but they also spark new questions. Why didn't anyone see more? Were there missed red flags? For victims' families, an arrest allows legal processes to begin, but it doesn't rewind trauma. For the wider community, realizing perpetrators were ordinary can fuel a sobering thought. Someone you passed on the airport shuttle, someone who took out the trash next door, could harbor lethal behaviors. That complicates trust.
Courtroom scenes were intense. Hausner's trial culminated in multiple death sentences in March 2009. During sentencing, he gave a rambling 30-minute statement, apologizing to family and bizarrely comparing himself to Manson, saying the name Hausner would carry infamy decades later. He reportedly told attorneys not to fight the death penalty because the jurors should put him to death to help victims' families heal, yet he didn't fully confess. That ambiguity, seeking notoriety but dodging direct confession, troubles me. Leon, as a psychologist, how do you read that?
It's performative. Declarative statements like that often serve multiple purposes: to control narrative, to signal remorse without relinquishing power, or to manipulate legal outcomes. Comparing oneself to Manson signals a desire to be mythologized. At the same time, suggesting execution could be framed as an apparent remorseful act, which paradoxically seeks to reassert control even in surrender. It's complex and often rooted in personality pathology combined with substance use.
Dieteman cooperated and pleaded guilty to multiple charges, securing life without parole. He's often described as remorseful. Cooperating with investigators helped prosecutors and perhaps spared them a capital expenditure. But many victim families saw a disparity in sentencing and wanted harsher punishment. That tension between plea bargaining to close the case and families' desire for justice recurs in many large-scale prosecutions. Leon, your thoughts?
Plea deals are pragmatism in the face of limited resources and the need for information. Prosecutors sometimes offer lesser sentences for cooperation because they gain testimony, confirm the extent of the crimes, and avoid protracted trials. That can feel like a betrayal to families wanting the maximum punishment, but it can also be the only route to the fullest account of events. Ethically, it's a fraught trade-off.
Let's humanize the victims for a moment. Robin Blasnick, 22, special needs, walking to her boyfriend's house. Her father later said he regretted every passing moment, every hug missed. Then there's Claudia Gutierrez Cruz, David Estrada, names that turned statistics into parents, siblings, friends. Survivors who lived through shootings faced permanent disabilities and long PTSD. Pets and horses were shot. The cruelty extended beyond human victims. Leon, how do we center these people in a narrative that's tempted to obsess over the perpetrators?
We make victims the focal point of memory. Don't spend airtime on the killer's manifesto or path to fame. Instead, tell the life stories of those harmed. Explore how families are coping, the medical and financial aftermath, the small details, what Robin liked to eat, what Claudia wanted to study. The victim's humanity is the anchor for ethical storytelling, and it resists sensationalism.
That's exactly what this show aims to do. We're not here to make villains rock stars. We're here to understand systems and to remember the people who bore the costs. Now, about motive. The sources point to meth use, thrill-seeking, boredom, and a craving for notoriety. They treated it like a game, dehumanized their targets, and escalated from shooting animals to humans to burning stores. But why that escalation? And why those victims? Leon?
Escalation can be driven by desensitization and reinforcement. If early acts produce a rush, adrenaline, peer approval, the actors may seek higher stakes to recreate the high. Targeting marginalized people is sadly expedient. Lessened detection risk, less immediate social outrage, perceived disposable humanity. Meth amplifies risk and reduces inhibitions, but the active choices remain. For motive, it's often a cocktail: availability of drugs, personality traits, lack of empathy, impulsivity, group dynamics, and social contexts where violence becomes normalized.
One of the longer-running questions: could these men have been stopped earlier? Were there warning signs? Shoplifting records, DUIs, or acquaintances bragging that, if acted upon, would have prevented escalation? The tip that broke the case came from an acquaintance. That suggests there were people who knew something. Did policing failures happen, or is this just the nature of a hard-to-detect crime?
Both. There are often missed opportunities, small red flags that don't aggregate into probable cause. Petty crimes don't always trigger deep investigations. Social services and drug treatment systems can also function as missed intervention points. But the specific MO here, quick drive-bys, random victims, makes detection difficult until patterns solidify. A better coordinated tip system and earlier community outreach might help. But hindsight makes these critiques clearer than real-time decision-making.
Another systems question: how does such a case change policing and policy? Afterward, Phoenix had to reassess how it handles pattern crimes, how it communicates risk without sparking panic, and the allocation of ballistics and analytical resources. Leon, any thoughts on policy lessons?
Invest in data integration, ballistics databases, GIS mapping, and interagency task forces can be decisive. Improve community policing so that vulnerable groups are not ignored. Enhance anonymous tip systems and follow through on low-level offenses that might signal escalation. Lastly, invest in addiction services. While not deterministic, addressing substance abuse reduces one of the accelerants we see in violent crime.
Let's talk about the overlap with the baseline killer for a moment. Two serial predators at once. Goudot, who was arrested in September 2006 and convicted for a series of abductions, rapes, and murders, and almost simultaneously, Hausner and Dieteman. The overlap created a press frenzy and thousands of tips. Some argue this confusion delayed detections and skewed early investigative priorities. Leon, do you think the presence of two predators materially impeded catching either sooner?
It certainly complicated things. The cognitive load on investigators is immense. Ballistics need matching, witness statements cross-checked, and every tip triaged. Two parallel sets increase the chance of misattributing crimes. However, investigators did have successes. Both cases were ultimately solved. The question is whether better resource distribution and clearer communication strategies could have reduced the period of terror. That's a fair policy question.
Hausner's suicide in 2013 closed one legal chapter in a way no one expected. He died by overdosing on amitriptyline. For families expecting the closure of an execution or perhaps answers in the final years, that felt like an additional blow. Leon, how do these post-conviction events affect healing?
Closure is a myth for many survivors. Some feel relief at conviction. Others yearn for apologies or explanations that never come. A suicide in custody can reopen wounds. Families may feel robbed of judicial finality. Others might feel it's a form of escape that avoids consequences. Psychologically, it's another complicated loss that reactivates trauma.
We need to acknowledge unanswered questions. This is the show's framing. Official convictions list 6 murders for Hausner and 2 for Dieteman, but investigators believe the pair committed as many as 8 murders and nearly 30 other shootings. Some specific questions. Were there other unsolved shootings tied to them? For each shooting, who fired the shot? Why the shift from animals to people to arson? Were opportunities for earlier intervention missed? Leon, what do you think remains the most pressing unanswered question?
Who exactly was responsible for each act, and why were marginalized victims chosen so often? That combination keeps the case in the liminal space between solved and unsolved. Knowing the full victim count is important for historical record and for families seeking acknowledgement. But beyond that, understanding the social pathways, what in community systems failed to redirect these men, could provide preventive lessons.
We should also consider the role of the media. Labels like serial shooter are useful shorthand, but they can mythologize criminals and feed the notoriety some offenders crave. Hausner himself apparently wanted that association with Manson. Leon, how should media balance public safety reporting with the risk of elevating perpetrators?
Focus on victims, context, and resources. Tell people what practical steps to take, where to report tips, and spotlight victim stories. Avoid sensationalized nicknames without necessity. Only report details that are essential for public safety. Ethical journalism can reduce the fame incentive for offenders and maintain the public's right to be informed.
Before we close, I want to let you give listeners one grounded takeaway, Leon. If you could put one recommendation in a memo to law enforcement and municipal leaders based on this case, what would it be?
Invest in integrated forensics and community outreach. Specifically, fund ballistics and data analysis units so patterns are detected faster, and pair that with robust outreach to marginalized communities, homeless populations, night shift workers, sex workers, so their reports are prioritized. Early pattern detection plus equitable policing reduces the window in which someone can terrorize a city.
Powerful. Now, a moment of reflection. The place where those drive-bys happened has changed. New neighborhoods, new streetlights. But the emotional landscape for victims' families rarely forgets. Some survivors live with permanent injuries. Some families mark anniversaries privately. For a city, the physical streets get paved over, but the memory of fear can remain. Leon, any final thought?
We should remember that solved, in a legal sense, doesn't mean healed for a community. Healing requires long-term support for victims, medical, psychological, financial, and an honest look at systems that allowed escalation. If nothing else, the story should push us toward investing in those aftercare systems.
Thank you, Leon. For listeners who want to read more, we've cited court records, contemporary news pieces, and public databases. We'll include links in the show notes. This episode won't satisfy every question. Some details, who fired which shot, whether every suspected incident was theirs, may remain partially unanswered, which is precisely why the case sits in the still unanswered folder.
Mara, one quick note for listeners. If you or someone you love was affected by these events, reach out to local victim services. Cases like this leave long shadows, and help is available even years later.
Good point. Resources matter. Next week, we'll follow up with a focused look at a single victim, Robin Blasnek, and the family's story, who she was, what they remember, and how they reckon with a sudden, senseless loss. It's a story that deserves to be told in full.
I'll be here for that, Mara. Stories like Robin's are the reason we do this work.
One last thought. We often look for simple narratives, a motive, a mastermind, a tidy explanation. But some of the darkest events are messy. Converging drugs, boredom, group dynamics, systemic blind spots. That messiness is why we keep asking why and how, and why, sometimes, answers remain incomplete. If you have information that could help close more gaps in this case, please contact the Phoenix Police Cold Case Tip Line. Small pieces become patterns.
And for anyone listening who's wrestling with fear from the past, learn self-care, community watch programs, and advocacy. Transforming fear into collective action is one of the healthiest responses.
Thank you for listening. This has been Still Unanswered. I'm Mara Velasquez. With me, Dr. Leon Harper. We'll be back next week with more cases that linger in the cracks between conviction and understanding. If you value this series, please consider supporting our work. Subscriptions help us fund reporting, victim outreach, and continued research. And if you think we missed something, reach out. We keep listening.